Today, I want to talk about the English Standard Version, or the ESV, and the New King James Version, or the NKJV. What they share, where they differ, and what you must know before choosing between them. So if you spent any time trying to pick between Bible translations, you know it can feel overwhelming. You want accuracy, you want clarity, you want stability, and maybe you have noticed lately that some people who used to use the ESV for years have been slowly moving to the NKJV. So what's really going on there? Are these translations that different, and does it really matter on their differences? I am primarily an ESV reader, and that's the translation I do most of my reading and studying from, but I also attend a church that is primarily NKJV. So every week I am hearing, preaching, reading, and teaching from both of these translations. And that's actually been very helpful for me. It's forced me to slow down, to understand the differences, and to see the Bible more clearly. So in this video, I want to walk through similarities, differences, textual foundations, stability concerns, and how to make a calm, confident decision between these two translations. So everybody, welcome back to the Bible Tidbits YouTube channel, where we look at Bibles, translations, and all kinds of things like that. So if you like that kind of video, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Now back to the NKJV versus the ESV. So when we talk about translation discussions, they can become heated quickly. But underneath all of that noise is a simple question. What kind of Bible will help you read consistently and confidently for decades? If you feel unsure about your translation, that uncertainty can quietly erode your trust. And if you're constantly switching, you will never build that familiarity. You know, the goal isn't to win a debate, it's to choose a translation that you can live in. So for these two translations, I want to start off on their similarities. What do they have in common? Both the ESV and the NKJV are essentially literal translations. That means they aim to translate word for word as closely as possible while still producing readable English. Both are widely trusted in conservative evangelical circles. Both are strong for preaching, teaching, memorization, and study, and both are serious Bibles. There's no major doctrinal differences between them. The gospel doesn't change depending on which translation you open. And this isn't about the good versus the bad. It's about philosophy and foundation, because both of these translations are excellent translations. The ESV was published originally in 2001 as a revision of the Revised Standard Version, of the RSV. Its goal was essentially literal, which means it is translation for accuracy while also modern readability. It smooths out older phrasing, updates archaic words, and reflects current scholarship. It feels modern but not casual like some do. The NKJV was first published in 1982 as a modernization of the King James Version. Its goal was to preserve the cadence and structure of the KJV while removing outdated English like thee, thou, and ye. It keeps a more traditional rhythm and vocabulary throughout it. And if you've read both side by side, the ESV often sounds slightly more contemporary, while the NKJV feels a little bit more historic in tone. But really, there is not a ton of difference between the two. The most major difference between these is actually the textual basis. And this is where the conversation becomes more substantive. Okay, the ESV uses what is called the critical text for the New Testament, which is based off the Nestle-Aland UBS Greek text, which reflects modern manuscript discoveries, including earlier manuscripts found over the last 150 years. The NKJV uses the Textus Receptus for the New Testament, the same textual tradition behind the King James Version. That difference explains why occasionally you'll see verses included fully in the NKJV that are bracketed or only in the footnotes of the ESV. Now here's something important though. The NKJV includes footnotes that show where the majority text or the critical text differs from the Textus Receptus. See, that transparency is significant. You can actually see where manuscript differences exist. For some readers, that builds trust. They appreciate knowing where these variations occur. If you're unsure what all these different manuscripts and textual traditions are, that is okay. That is getting into the nitty-gritty of translation. But I'll link some information down below where you can learn more about that specific topic. But when you get into the major discussion between these two translations today, it is stability. But one of the biggest points of discussion between these two translations in recent years has been textual stability. And this is the reason many ESV users have moved over to the NKJV. The ESV has undergone several updates since 2001. The first being in 2007, then you have 2011, then you have 2016, and then 2025. And most of these changes were small wording adjustments, nothing doctrinally significant. However, the 2016 edition was briefly described as a permanent text, and that decision was reversed. That created some uneasiness for readers who value that long-term textual stability. Again, the changes were minor, but for some people who memorize large portions of scripture, who preach weekly, and even small wording changes, they can feel disruptive. The NKJV, on the other hand, has remained essentially unchanged to readers since 1982. That stability has attracted so many readers who want a fixed text, knowing that there's not going to be revisions. What they memorize now is going to be the same thing in the Bible later. And I understand that instinct. Stability matters over decades of reading. My position personally, as I mentioned earlier, is I'm a primary ESV reader. I love this translation. It's the translation I read from and study from and teach from every day. But I sit under New King James Version preaching every week. And that experience has actually increased my appreciation for both of these translations. The ESV feels slightly clearer in some passage. The NKJV, though, feels often weightier in tone. Hearing from both regularly, though, reminds me that translation differences are not affecting the meaning near as much as we ever imagine. The core message is always there, and it is always steady. When reading these translations, you'll find that the NKJV preserves a more traditional theological vocabulary. Many of those large words have not been translated or taken out. They're often retained in a fuller, more historic form. The ESV often keeps those same terms, but at other times it might opt for slightly smoother phrasing. The NKJV also maintains a cadence that echoes those earlier English Bible reading. For some, that continuity feels grounding. The ESV sometimes feels a little bit more streamlined, and neither of these approaches is wrong. They simply prioritize slightly different things. Some readers are drawn to the NKJV because it preserves the lineage of the King James tradition. That historical continuity matters to them. Others are drawn to the ESV because it reflects ongoing manuscript scholarship and careful revisions. Both instincts come from a desire for faithfulness. The key is to recognize what you value most: historic continuity, textual stability, modern scholarship, readability, and how those factors affect your long-term reading. So you might prefer the ESV if, say, you appreciate a slightly more modern phrasing. Maybe your church uses it. You value the critical text tradition. You like its balance of readability and literalness. You might prefer the NKJV if you value long-term textual stability. You appreciate the traditional cadence. You prefer the Textus Receptus tradition, or you want manuscript differences clearly footnoted. So in practical direction between these two translations, I want to just give you 3 simple suggestions. First, choose one and stay with it. Familiarity builds depth. Second, don't let translation debates replace Bible reading. The goal isn't to master textual criticism, it's to know Scripture. And third, if you are genuinely unsure, read an entire book out of both translations. Maybe Philippians or James, 2 small but awesome books that you'll enjoy. Notice which one helps you to slow down and to understand the text better. Not which one helps you win arguments, but which one helps you to read the Bible. The ESV and the NKJV are both faithful, trustworthy translations of Scripture. They differ in textual basis, tone, and revision history. Some readers have moved from the ESV to the NKJV for reasons of perceived stability. Others have remained committed to the ESV because they value its approach to scholarship and clarity. I personally use the ESV, and I worship in a church that primarily uses the NKJV. And week after week, I'm reminded of something simple. The power is not in the translation itself. The power is in the word itself. So choose wisely, stay steady, and keep reading. We'll see y'all next time.